Well, I realized TradFi was broken way before I realized Bitcoin was the answer. And so during the great financial crisis, obviously all of Wall Street was broken. Pensions became underfunded for the first time. Debt levels skyrocketed in America, across the globe. And then soon after, the thing that actually sparked Bitcoin was the bailouts. And so that you see that in the first Bitcoin block, right, where it was the call out to the printing of money and creating a new money that should be a better money, right? And you see these debt levels explode, and you see something that's unsustainable. The reintroduction of a savings asset that I can go out and work, do whatever it might be, and buy something that's going to likely go up in value over time, like Bitcoin. I'm actually not concerned about Bitcoin going up. I am concerned about.
Hey everyone, quick thing before we start. Over 50,000 of you keep coming back to watch and listen to this podcast, but over 65% of you still haven't subscribed yet. So here's my simple ask. If you find value in my Bitcoin content and you enjoy what I'm doing, please take a second to hit subscribe on YouTube or follow me on your go-to podcasting app. It's a small action that really helps push my content through the algorithm, and this way we can make sure that more people learn about Bitcoin. Thanks for being part of this journey. Now let's dive into this episode. All right, Matt Cole, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Thanks, Brian.
Happy to see you here. We talked a bit before, but I'm happy that we're able to record a bit of longer conversation. So nice to see you again. And I was just thinking, let's just start with your journey, man. Like you went from grinding as a finance intern to running Strive with 2 billion AUM and really pushing Bitcoin hard. I see you everywhere talking about Bitcoin. And I was just thinking, take me back a little bit. Like, what was the moment you realized TradFi was broken and how Bitcoin flipped the script for you?
Well, I realized TradFi was broken way before I realized Bitcoin was the answer. But did start out as a lowly intern at CalPERS, started there in 2006. Right before the great financial crisis. And so during the great financial crisis, obviously all of Wall Street was broken. Pensions became underfunded for the first time. Debt levels skyrocketed in America, across the globe. And then soon after, the thing that actually sparked Bitcoin, but wasn't following at the time, was the bailouts. And so that you see that in the first Bitcoin block, right, where it was a call out to the printing of money and creating a new money that should be a better money, right? Yeah. I saw that at the same time I was working in fixed income, and you see these debt levels explode, and you see something that's unsustainable. You see forecasts into the future of debt levels sustaining, entitlements specifically in America, where Social Security, Medicare benefits just continue to rise, and then the response from our government is never to actually fix the problem, but a continual kick the can down the road with, printing more money, issuing more debt. And that's just something that almost everyone, it's kind of a consensus thing. This is not sustainable. It's going to end poorly unless it's fixed, but then it's not fixed. And so I'm sitting there, I rose from an intern to become a portfolio manager in fixed income, managed about $70 billion. And then Bitcoin first came onto the scene for me, probably in about 2012, 2013. And it's kind of a funny story. So I'm super into fitness. Haven't had as much time as I want to work out lately, but I found about Bitcoin on a bodybuilding floor. I don't think I've ever even said this publicly. Okay. When I was in New York last week at the Bitcoin Investor Week, was talking to some guys, and they just thought it was hilarious. So I might as well say it. So I was learning about fitness, and all these bodybuilders are talking about Bitcoin. And my first reaction was, I'm an institutional investor managing $70 billion, and these bodybuilders think they found the solution to a broken money. Like, good luck. Like, right? No chance. So in a sense that seeing it there almost was made it harder for me to accept it initially. But, saw the rise up in 2013, 2014 bull market, then the crash that came to follow for Bitcoin. And my reaction to that crash was, I knew it. I knew it was a scam.
Classic.
But then it didn't die, and it started to rise back up, right? And so in 2016, when it wasn't at zero, but it was starting to come back up, find a stable base, I started to feel like maybe I just don't understand this asset. And so I went down a deep educational journey. And one of the things I love about the Bitcoin community, which I think is still true to this day, is that anybody, if they're really interested in it, the Bitcoin community is more than happy to educate them in a deep way, in an authentic way. And you could go to places like, go to PubKey in New York or whatever, and you can find a great community to educate you. So I found that on Twitter, and talking to some of the leaders in the space, just to some anonymous Twitter account with probably 2 followers, and became orange pilled myself. And so then I basically ended up putting all my money all my free money into Bitcoin, which wasn't a lot at the time. I was a younger guy in my career, but went all in. Once you get Bitcoin, you quickly feel very short the asset that you become the most bullish on. And so, that was probably very, very, very late 2016, early 2017 when I really made my first large allocation to Bitcoin, and really haven't stopped talking about it since, and just have kind of grown in my conviction of there's just so much more to learn, and the more you learn about it, the better. And so now, obviously, at Strive, we're also focused on it, and it feels great to be able to do the same thing I'm doing behind the scenes, which is investing in Bitcoin and pushing that out to the masses.
Love that. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think, it's so fascinating. I talked to, I don't know, you're like episode guest 133 or something, like the theme of, I saw it, I dismissed it because of whatever the environment was that I got in touch with it first. Then I saw it crash and I was like, yeah, it sucks. And then the thing that a lot of people tell me is that the fact it didn't die was a big signal for them. Right. And I think that's still really interesting now. There's still people that dismiss that, but that argument becomes like less valuable each time someone says it, I think. And I kind of relate that back to, do you know how many ideas get released on the internet every day, right? Like how many ideas just in general are released in the world every day, and 99.9% of ideas die. And especially the idea for a new, better, decentralized magic internet money should probably have died along the way. But the fact that it still exists has been a big signal for a lot of people that they share that with me. And I think it's really cool that you share that too. And I wanted to just ask, like, what, looking back, it's kind of like an ego test, because eventually you started studying, you had a background in finance, you probably learned stuff along the way that you thought was different before. How did you kind of go through that ego journey of kind of like challenging all the preconceptions that you had before?
Yeah, so I think, and a lot of people in our generation are set up to, when they do humble themselves, to get it. And so I was a very tech forward person, like whether it's basic coding or just being involved in the internet. I actually put myself through college playing online poker. So I saw something which I think online poker actually has some ties back to both what I've learned in Bitcoin, and then also now with AI as a revolution. But when online poker started, everyone would laugh at the online poker kids and say that they're never going to translate to live poker. Like, when you sit down at a real table, I can look you in the eyes, and these young kids aren't going to get that. What happened was that the online kids were playing hands at such a rapid rate and playing 20 tables versus 1 table that they ate the lunch of the live players over time, because they became so much better.
Yes.
And I think that the internet is continuing to tell that story, and tell it with young kids oftentimes, right? That immerse themselves in something. And I think Bitcoin was a version of that. Where that happened. I think AI, it's going to be very, very similar. And exponential change is just really hard to understand. And so I think when I humbled myself to look into Bitcoin, I already was accepting that, like, there's something here that's probably like interesting. And I just don't know if it's just the black market and the desire to be able to transact on the internet for illicit purposes, or if there's actually something better. And obviously there's something better, but at least to start, that wasn't clear. humbling yourself is important. And I think that's just something that people that accept Bitcoin are good at. People that will be fast to accept AI will be good at that. I accept for me an AI as a revolution, that AI is probably going to be better and smarter than me within 10 years, probably towards the faster version of that than the longer version of that. But like AI is going to be smarter than me and better than me as an investor. And so I'm going to accept that. I'm going to push into that and not fight it. Similarly to Bitcoin versus other currencies. And so this gets into, even the government perspective is, my perspective on the United States and Bitcoin is that the US needs Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't need the United States. And so as someone that loves America, that's a message that I'm pushing to regulators, to anyone that will listen, is that it doesn't matter what you think. You need to humble yourselves and accept the reality and be forward looking, not backward.
Bitcoin custody is evolving, and while self-custody is important, it has its own risks and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your custody setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-signature vault, guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Your funds are fully auditable on-chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only move or withdrawn at your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Bitcoin is money, and as the price continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, insurance, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security or accessibility. Check out onrampbitcoin.com through the link below and schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team to get to know them and learn more about their offering.
And so many of our millennial peers, they're stuck with crazy debt, and I think just through their coming of age, it's been a shaky economy probably most of the time. Maybe up until they were 18, it was really nice, and then after that, gradually went from boom to bust. How do you see Bitcoin giving our generation like a legit shot at winning, as Gen X had, Boomers had before? Because like traditional finance basically failed us, and we were sold something differently, I always say, but I think like people in our age range, making big life decisions about where to live, having a family, etc. I think we both think that Bitcoin is the perfect asset, that when you adopt that, you look more positive towards the future and you want to do all these things. But in general, many people are pretty nihilistic about the future. And just want to get your thoughts on like, how do you see Bitcoin changing that? Like, why does Bitcoin bring that hope for the future?
Well, the status quo is that there's obviously been a massive printing of money. And in dollar terms, our generation is screwed. You look at the price of homes, you look at the price of assets, wherever you look, I mean, the price of eggs may be fine, but it's really hard as a young citizen to think through, how do I marry someone? How do I raise a family? How do I buy a house? That equation's really hard. And at the heart of it is that there's been a lack of a savings vehicle in the world. Dollars, any fiat currency depreciates. And even if you're invested in a short-term treasury or money market account, the real rate of return on those investments are negative. And so the only way you get ahead is by owning financial assets that really, financial assets, even like when you look at the S&P 500 or housing, on a percentage of monetary growth, so M3 or M2 monetary growth, over the last like several decades, housing and stocks are actually flat. And so you basically have something that's flat, or you're losing value, purchasing power. That's a cycle that's really hard to get out of. And people that were in the cycle earlier, like baby boomers, are better positioned than people in our generation. The reintroduction of a savings asset is such a powerful tool that I can go out and work, do whatever it might be and buy something that's going to likely go up in value over time, like Bitcoin, that's a game changer. And so that then can flip your mind to something that's a more optimistic view into the future. I think AI plays a big role in that as well. I think that we really are entering a golden age in the globe and in America, where there is optimism of being able to have a family, support a family by adopting both Bitcoin and AI innovation.
Yeah. I think the reason why it's so difficult for people is that, one of the things that has been sold to us, that saving is good. You can acquire more units of dollars or euros. But I think the thing behind that is what nobody ever talks about, and what you just touched upon. I think it's twofold, right? Like what people need to figure out: the creation of money. I just looked up a tweet that I saw day before yesterday. Came from a podcast of Preston Pish with what's his name, Matthew Mazinskis, and he shared about global money supply, that it has expanded at an average rate of 12.6% per year over the past 10 years. So in simple terms, that's a 71% currency debasement over 10 years. So that is what you need to mitigate, basically, when you go out there and you have your job and your venture or a venture, and you get paid for your work, you come home, and then you have to take like more risk and mitigate that part, which just in general, I think is a hard thing to understand, but to maybe come to grip with, right? Like really accept that you have to do that. And there was another clip by Tad Smith, who you probably also know. He mentioned that, Bitcoin, he got Bitcoin when he realized that, if the average money supply grows like 10% a year, well, apparently it's even more. An average return in the S&P 500 is like 9.8%, then you're still behind. And so that's what I meant with like what has been sold to us, like, be a good person and invest in all these indexes, etc. It just doesn't work nominally, eventually, like in just real, nominally, it looks nice, but in real return, you're basically going backwards. And that's just understanding the problem before you can even see Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, and I think this is why the education around Bitcoin and money is so powerful. People that don't understand that, they inherently know that something's wrong, that they're kind of screwed. They just don't know, if they haven't done the education, why. They don't understand money. They don't understand Bitcoin as a solution. But it's why the effects of why I'm so bullish on Bitcoin growing is that when almost every single person, especially younger people, feel the same problem, then education gets them to the solution. I think the only people that really will struggle to always get it will be the older generation that is well off, that through for some reason, they're in a good position. Then they don't see the need for Bitcoin. But when you look at the globe, people in third world countries, they see the need for it almost instantly because they've been dealing with unstable currencies, unstable regimes. Younger generations, even in developed markets, they see it. So I think as we continue to go out there and educate, and it's why I always come back to the most important thing for this to succeed is education. And so we try to educate ourselves. We try to help others that we think are really educating around Bitcoin from a great first principles perspective to help them get their word out there, because that to me is the most important thing to make sure that this goes forward. And I think it will, but I think that's how you help people faster.
Yeah. And of course it's step by step. Like you need to, you need to be curious enough, I kind of always say, to, really get to a point where you're like, I need to study something, like I need to figure this out, like what is going on, right? So I also think it does take some time, but for example, when there's big chatter in countries about perhaps adopting Bitcoin. I think yesterday or today there was a really great video about Bhutan, actually, that they mine Bitcoin with their hydropower, with their dams, etc. And they talk to people on the street also, and those people said, well, we are happy that they don't buy it with tax money, but that they mine it. And I thought it was really interesting to see that in just a small country like that. But of course, in America, there's also chatter. You just mentioned that, and I also heard you say before, the first nation to stack a Bitcoin reserve will come out on top. Why should millennials that when they go to the grocery store just to get dinner, they have to pay $50 or 50 euros? They have this problem, but why should they care about this national reserve for Bitcoin? Why would that possibly help them if their country would adopt Bitcoin?
Yeah, well, I'll focus on the United States because that's obviously home for me. But the United States has had the privilege of having the global reserve currency now for getting close to 100 years. And when you look at history, there's been many global reserve currencies, and they typically fall around 100 years. And so unless you can make some claim to why the dollar is different, my argument would be for America, the days of the dollar as the global reserve currency are numbered. And I think when you look at AI innovation, when you look at the debt levels of the United States, obviously other fiat currencies as well, the United States is not the only fiat currency that has been extremely irresponsible with their debt levels. But it's hard to envision a future in 50 years from now, probably substantially less than that, where the globe needs to rely on the dollar as the reserve currency. That is a humbling message to say. I say that as someone that is, for my country, is America first, as an America first person. I don't think the dollar has longevity as the global reserve currency. I've thought that for a long time. Once you accept that, you say, well, okay, I could try to preserve the dollar as the global reserve currency, or I could think what positions my country for the most strength into the future. It would be to get a war chest of the thing that's likely to have value, the savings vehicle, that is Bitcoin. So if you think about what that would do if the United States was the first mover to acquire a massive war chest, then we are in from a balance sheet perspective, we go from a position of weakness with a debt crisis to a position of strength with a war chest as something that's extremely valuable to use into the future. So if you have that war chest and your balance sheet is strong, your need to tax into the future goes down. If your balance sheet is weak, your need to tax into the future goes up. So I think it will have impacts in a lot of different ways, but on a taxation perspective, it would likely lower tax in the long run for companies that adopt it. Why does it matter? Countries that move first. It doesn't really matter if it's a small country that moves to adopt Bitcoin, but from a developed large nation, if China were to announce plans next week that they're going to kick off a purchase of a million Bitcoin and deploy whatever percentage of their money, the price of Bitcoin is going to skyrocket. Bitcoin is a scarce asset, as we know. There's not even enough Bitcoin. I think BlackRock had a report. If every millionaire in America wanted one Bitcoin, there's not enough, right? Mm-hmm. It's a scarce asset. So it's why moving first is so important. You move second, you're behind the ball. And so I think the United States has the ability to move fast and has an administration that wants to, but I think we have to continue to light a fire under their butts that if you don't move fast, you're just at the whims of another country moving before us. And when is that? We don't know. And this will be similar to the fight that corporations have to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury asset as well. It's going to be the same fight in America. It's going to be the same fight in China, is that within the cabinet or the leadership of America or China or name your country, there's going to be probably a few people that get this. There's going to be a few people that still are Bitcoin skeptics, because we know there's a lot of people that are out there, and these are more likely to be older generation. And so the people that through education that can tell this story in a compelling way the fastest, I think, is going to win. It's why I don't think you've seen either China or America move, but I'm super optimistic that we're having these conversations in our country right now.
Yeah, to refer back to, do you know how many ideas get released on the internet? The fact that it is an actual conversation is pretty mind blowing, I think. And just also a signal again in general, right? Like that this is a serious subject to discuss. I wanted to, maybe we can unpack it a little bit more, because I was wondering, how you talk about it. It feels like it's the most, or well, I think it's the most logical, like rational, strategical thing to do as a country, right? If you understand whether it has an internal or external cause, right? Like that, or perhaps it's just organic, by the way, that, the dollar hegemony, is crumbling like that. That's probably just an organic thing, because other countries that were forced to use the dollar in their trade, right? They're just recognizing over time, like, oh, this is not really a good deal, right? So I think it's probably like a more organic discovery by these other countries. Plus, internally, well, if you go to usdebtclock.org, you see the result of, debasing your own currency, so to say. If you then see that the world is going to move to, it's going to be a multipolar world, or there's going to be multiple blocks. I mean, you see Europe struggling with America right now, and BRICS are quietly, just continuing whatever they want to do. Eventually, pure isolation probably won't work for any of these blocks or groups, or let's say just America, right? So if you don't want to use other countries or other blocks' currencies, you need a neutral, global, instant way to pay for this trade. And for me, that sounds very logical that eventually ends up with Bitcoin. But I was wondering how you view that. Like, maybe that's a few steps ahead. But for me, I don't know. I just feel like that's where it's probably going, because gluing the friendships back together seems a bit out of the door, right? So in some way, if you just want to keep on trading, you need something like Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think where the globe is going is not necessarily to where there are no friendships, but I think what it is what a friendship is from one nation to the other is probably going to be defined differently, where we were moving towards this globalization, almost like where the difference between one nation to the next might be more like a state versus a nation. And I think it's moving back towards sovereign nations acting in their own best interest. And a sovereign nation acting in its own best interest will want to do trade with other nations.
Yes,
that's obvious. It will want to form alliances, all sorts of stuff like that. But I think there's been a movement, at least from like the American perspective, of deals that were less advantageous for America, maybe not the best deals. So rethinking those deals. I don't think that means no deals, but I think that does mean a restructuring. And for the other side, I would say like those countries should, and they should put their interests first, right? And then you come together, and I don't think that where that will end is no relationship. I think it will be a relationship still, but a relationship that kind of needs to be restructured a bit. And there's some pain in that, but I do think that it does point to Bitcoin, because it would point to a more transactional relationship in a sense. And a more transactional relationship would be a relationship that would have less of a desire to rely on the currency of the other nation. And it looks like something that's more independent and sovereign in itself. And Bitcoin becomes the obvious answer when you look at how bad of shape all the currencies around the world are in.
If you have your Bitcoin in self-custody, where are you keeping your Bitcoin seed words? For me, there's only one way, and that's backing up my seed phrase with stamp seed. It's a single durable plate without any parts or materials. Stamp your words into solid titanium, which is fire-resistant, water-resistant, and built to last. Unlike etching or engraving, stamp seed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, making it easy for you to protect your generational wealth. Don't risk losing your seed phrase on paper. Get a stamp seed plate for unmatched protection. You can use code BRAM, that's BRAM, for 15% off at stampseed.com.
Yeah, it would be interesting, right? Like if I want to trade with you and you want me to use your currency, and I say no, then like kind of like the deal is off, right? Or I say, well, I want to use my currency and you don't like euros. I think it's kind of, I agree. It's kind of like that's where it's going. But we still want to trade. Either I have something to export, or you have something that I need in my country. Like that won't really stop. Yeah, I think that this actually comes pretty close to the original idea of our concept of Bitcoin. I saw a term last week that said something like neutral cross-border final settlement, or something like that. And I think Bitcoin is the only asset or tool, let's call it a monetary tool, right, that can facilitate that. So it makes sense that there should be countries that will show their trade over time, but I also, in Bitcoin, maybe it's oil or other commodities that they eventually trade for Bitcoin. But yeah, it will probably take some time because the older generation just isn't there yet. Yeah, how far away do you think that is? Is there like an accelerant for that?
I think it's completely spread everywhere around the globe in less than 10 years. And I think the reason that I say 10 years and not 2 years is I think it could be towards 5 years versus 10. I think what I don't fully get yet is just all the interplays of AI as a massive disruptor around the globe. You're clearly seeing the fracturing of some of these relationships right now, and sovereign nations tend to move a little bit more slow than quickly. So my prediction is probably around 5, but less than 10.
Yeah. So we're recording this the day before the pretty hyped White House crypto summit. Do you expect any big announcements?
You keep hearing people from the administration saying strategic Bitcoin reserve. So, I think there will be some announcement around that. But importantly, I'm of the view that an administrative action towards a strategic Bitcoin reserve is a good thing. But ultimately, this needs to be done through legislation to have lasting impact and not be something that's just at the whims of being unwound or to even be the right size. And so on the 7th, there's tomorrow, that's one day after our recording, there's a meeting at the White House to discuss the crypto summit that has Bitcoiners, have other people from the industry. And then a couple days later on the 11th, there's another event called Bitcoin for America. That event's going to be very focused on specifically and only a Bitcoin strategic reserve, but also to the Senate and the House specifically. And so really around the legislation, how do we do this from a way that persists in the United States over the long run and lay out the case for Congress? And so part of this, Michael Saylor's going to be laying out the keynote. Vivek will be there laying out another keynote. I'm going to be talking to many of the people there as well. And it's hitting every single point of why they should care and why they should care now. Some of the things that we've already talked about, right? Many of the things that we've already talked about, and push them to do this legislatively. And so I think that road has a path, but it's a little bit harder of a path. And so I don't actually have a prediction yet of how long that path will take, but I do think that eventually we get there.
Yeah, it's also interesting, right? Like just the legislative part or path. Yeah, it might take some time, but as we talked about, eventually there's also some sort of game theory, right? So even if as a country you formally announce that this is something you're going to pursue, it doesn't mean that next week you'll have the Bitcoin that you want that you mentioned. And so I think it's very fragile, right? Like communicating this strategy versus executing the strategy, because there's also a lot of talk about other countries, for example, also already China having a stack, or UAE having a stack, or Qatar having a stack, and so when they, let's say America announces their intent to do it, and then Qatar says, well, we already have 300k Bitcoin, then I'd say all bets are off. That's going to be a very fascinating thing to watch. But of course, it's all speculation. But again, I always feel like it's just so rational. I cannot imagine that I'm the only person that figured this out, or we are the only people that figured this out, right? So there have to be other countries that are already stacking. It would be the best for any future of any country, at least for stability in the long term. So yeah, I'm excited to see where it's going to go. I think a lot of people in Bitcoin and crypto in general are kind of beat down. So I see a lot of like nothing burger tweets. So let's see how it goes tomorrow. You also mentioned like companies stacking Bitcoin. I also saw. Well, you've been telling companies like GameStop, for example, to build a Bitcoin treasury. How do you see that trend growing in the coming years? And also, like, why should a company actually adopt a Bitcoin strategy?
Yeah. So the short version on how I see the trend going, then I'll talk about the why. I think that this year you're going to see a handful of already public companies that will adopt it, and I think you're going to see many other forward-looking companies that will go to market as Bitcoin treasury companies. And my prediction there is that the companies that do this the quickest are going to set themselves up for long-run success. And so I do think that you're going to see massive disruption in almost every single sector of public equities through companies that acquire war chests of Bitcoin that can then deploy them in the future, and basically take leading positions in various sectors. So that's kind of, I think, how the trend goes. Again, I will say within 10 years, I think near every single company in the S&P 500 will own Bitcoin. So similar to what I think happens in the nation, I think it's a savings vehicle. And we're at the place now where there's career risk to ignore it. I think that before it was a little bit too small of an asset class. At 100K and higher, there's definite career risk to ignore a true scarce hard asset, better treasury asset to hold, whether you're a financial advisor, a corporation, a state, a nation state. So I think we're on the clock where I think this is going to be moving, and early movers will be to their advantage. With regards to how we approach this with corporations, so we're an asset manager. We have a wealth management arm, but on the asset management arm, through our ETFs, we have exposure to basically the 2,000 largest market cap companies in America. And our view is that every single one of them should own Bitcoin, but from a focus point, at least one company per sector should adopt the Bitcoin standard and put Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and those early movers are going to benefit in massive ways. The 2,000 company out of the top 2,000 company that buys Bitcoin, they probably are almost dead when they buy it, like, because they ignored the trend, right? Like, so at that point, it's a survival thing. Right now, it's an opportunistic thing.
Yeah.
Even though they'll all adopt it eventually. And so our view is that Bitcoin is the hurdle rate, or should be the hurdle rate, for capital deployment. So if you're looking to spend money in the future, it should beat Bitcoin. And Bitcoin obviously has had amazing historical returns. But even when you look into the future, right now, we still don't have a savings vehicle. Cash has negative real interest rates. If the interest rate moves positive, it will change in a drastic way. This isn't even about Bitcoin, just a real savings vehicle will change in a drastic way how you think about spending money. Whether you're spending money to acquire a business, M&A, whether you're spending money to do a stock buyback, issue a dividend, name your type of spending money, hire more people, right? If money has a negative real interest rate, your incentive is that money is almost like hot potato. You want to get rid of it as fast as possible. When it goes up in value, you want to accumulate it, right? So that mindset shift generally will change capital decisions in a drastic way, because ever since we're basically going on year 17 of negative real interest rates post the great financial crisis. So the pitch is make Bitcoin the hurdle rate for capital deployment. If you're doing stock buybacks, maybe you should just be acquiring a massive stack of Bitcoin. If you have unprofitable business lines, you should acquire Bitcoin. So we used GameStop as the first company to engage with because they're in our indexes. 3 of our ETFs own GameStop. It's a failing business that has the luxury of being highly traded. And so they've been able, because they're highly traded and have this meme mania and like real fans of their stock, get $5 billion of cash. Well, they're kind of the perfect kind of company to at least start to transform themselves by adopting a Bitcoin standard.
I think, the whole internet meme of the most entertaining outcome is the most likely. I think that suits GameStop to a T, right? Just really showing the inefficiencies of traditional finance, then using that leverage to eventually move to what we think is the most revolutionary monetary invention of our life, right? That would be thoroughly entertaining, I'd say. So I'm rooting for that. But the CEO replied, right? He read the letter.
He said message received.
Okay.
I think to your point though, on the most entertaining outcome being the most likely, how entertaining would it be if 10 years into the future, GameStop was one of the most powerful companies in America?
Yeah.
That would be insane.
Yeah.
It would almost be laughable when you think about the whole meme mania around GameStop and what a transformation could look like. Mm-hmm. I actually think that is possible.
Yes,
that reality is possible.
Yeah.
And so it was not met as a unserious letter. It's actually like a very serious letter, that there's this opportunity right now to start from a failing business that no one cared about. Then you got the meme stock mania. Yeah. Then you have the transformation. Yeah. And anyway, so it's
well, I think about this a lot. Like, you can just do the things, like you can just do it. And I think connecting that to the hurdle rate, and I'd love to unpack that a little bit more. But if money is the hot potato and you're forced to spend it, do you really think about what you're spending it on, right? Like, are you diligent with your money? And I think just that is the overall bigger theme that we're talking about when we're talking about monetary debasement, etc. But for companies to really have a long-term outlook, a long-term strategy, like really perform and not be a zombie company, right? Like I think Michael Saylor also described MicroStrategy, when he was researching what should I do with my cash. By the way, when he was doing that, he had 500 million in cash. You just mentioned GameStop has 5 billion, right? So the opportunity, or maybe the urge is also bigger, because, if Bitcoin is your hurdle rate, right? If and maybe you can explain hurdle rate for the audience, but in my mind, it's like, is there something I can spend it on that has a better return than me just holding the Bitcoin and see that value accrue, basically? That makes you very diligent about what you're spending it on. And that's the whole bigger thesis, I think, of Bitcoin, where the entire society can go if you have a hard money standard and you're very diligent with your money. You only spend it on quality stuff, on high quality stuff, or highly entertaining stuff, or whatever, but quality, right? And I think that actually exposes the entire kind of like TradFi, other people call it scam, but like, the game, it exposes that even more. If you start being diligent with your money, you will, and being rational, you can outperform the companies that are not.
So what's really interesting about this is that for a non-Bitcoiner, they would think about a conversation that you and I might be having as just some short-term, get-rich, Bitcoin to the moon conversation. It's actually the opposite. We're talking about long-run success for corporations, for nations, and actually setting a higher standard for how to think about operating a business. That would probably be mind-blowing to people that are on the outside, what they would think the Bitcoin community talks about.
Dude, I love that you said that, because as you're saying that, I'm thinking, it's a commitment to long term. It's actually a huge decision that you make when you adopt Bitcoin, right? You say, like, I want to survive for a very, very long time. I don't want to party now. I'm seriously thinking about just living longer, something like that, right? It's a really big decision, adopting Bitcoin.
Yeah, totally. And so once you start having that conversation and you start thinking about Wall Street and just how broken it's been, and time again, right, we're talking about now zombie companies. Well, zombie companies wasn't a term or something that was thought about pre-great financial crisis, right? That was something that came about through this era of easy money. And this whole mindset of hot potato, there's so many companies that have no viable business future that are able to persist because there's no standard for deploying capital with the current monetary system. And so, and what a move back to reasonableness to adopt a Bitcoin standard and Bitcoin as the hurdle rate. And if it's interesting, I'm happy to go a little bit deeper into what the hurdle rate is. So, my background is portfolio management. So when I used to be a fixed income portfolio manager, I was actively managing a portfolio, and my hurdle rate was a benchmark. And that benchmark was just an index. So for me, it was the Bloomberg Ag, which is like the number one benchmark for fixed income. But you could think about it as a stock or equity portfolio manager that manages versus the S&P 500. Or as an active portfolio manager, that is our hurdle rate to deploy capital. That if we're going to invest, if you're managed versus the S&P 500, and you're going to buy a stock, you're betting that it's going to beat the S&P 500 in the future.
Yeah.
What's never told is what is the return of the S&P 500 going to be over the next year? No one knows the answer to that. And so no one also knows the answer to what will the return of Bitcoin be in the future. You don't know. But by saying Bitcoin is the hurdle rate, we're putting executives and corporations on notice that unless you beat Bitcoin, the next move several years down the road, if you've underperformed Bitcoin because you didn't adopt it as a hurdle rate, will be you need to be fired, right? Because you did not adopt Bitcoin as a hurdle rate, you underperformed Bitcoin. And so it's basically to say, the light of fire under people's butts that have been deploying capital in inefficient ways, that now you're going to be judged against an asset that's been performing great and has a lot of tailwinds behind it on why it will continue to perform great. And so if you don't think you can beat it, join it, buy it, put it on your balance sheet. And when you think you can in the future, deploy it very strategically and think long run, not short run, get rid of my cash as fast as possible.
Yeah. If I translate that to adopting Bitcoin is the most responsible thing you can do financially, that kind of sounds like that, actually.
Yeah, it does. And when Bitcoin is the hurdle rate, it's very hard to say that you shouldn't at least own stuff.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very good point. I maybe this ties in, but I also saw, and I saw also that you communicated something like about this as the firm, and I saw Vivek also talk about that ESG and DEI are like distractions, and I think from my side, a hard agree. From some of the millennials would hard agree. I think many also don't. I know, but like how you are really focused on more meritocracy, equality of opportunity, not outcome, all these things. How does Bitcoin fuel that way of looking at, let's say, business or life in general? And yeah, why, and maybe we just gave the answer actually, but why should millennials kind of like ditch these corporate buzzwords and this trend for Bitcoin? Like how can we put those things next to each other?
Yeah, so this gets into how do you create a flourishing economy over the long run, regardless of your own views of values. Almost everyone would agree that they want to see humanity flourish. The difficulty becomes in what does that mean? How do you make humanity flourish? My belief is that you let humanity flourish by embracing innovation, by aligning incentives where people that provide value to help push humanity and innovation forward are rewarded. And that is meritocracy, both in hiring, but also in how much people are rewarded financially for their contributions to society. That is the reason. And I know you're across the pond, but that is the reason why there's graphs that show the aggregate market cap of American corporations versus European corporations, and why American corporations are so much larger as a percentage of market cap, because we've created a better incentive system to drive business behavior, to drive technological innovation. And my hope is that we unlock that in corporations. And part of unlocking that was removing restrictions from the ESG and the DEI movement. And this gets into part of this was it was never about the values of that, because for me myself, I'm a Christian. Okay. I never wanted corporate America to be Christian corporate America. I think that would be value destructive for shareholders. I want corporations to be agnostic to the values and within the law, ethically maximize value. So that means not being ESG or DEI focused, not being Christian focused, but being united around a mission to innovate and maximize value to shareholders. That's always been the view of Strive, and Bitcoin fits perfectly in that, in a democratized, decentralized, true free market cash currency that is the best form of currency, scarce asset ever known to man. That asset belongs in corporate America. It belongs in people's portfolios, and it will help fuel innovation in productive ways, not unproductive ways. Because ultimately, if cash is being put to use to give people jobs to work in zombie companies, that ultimately is harmful for human flourishing, versus those companies either shut down or they reduce their headcount, adopt a Bitcoin standard, and then people can be in positions where they're actually contributing positively to the future of our world.
Yeah. So a lot of folks still see Bitcoin as a gamble, a risky bet, or maybe even still a fad. What's the one killer point that you would share with them to get them off the fence and engage in, I think, what we both see as, the biggest monetary revolution of our lifetime?
The first thing I would say is, how many hours have you spent educating yourself on the history of money and Bitcoin? Because the answer typically is they've almost spent no time. Mm-hmm. And so if you haven't educated yourself on Bitcoin, you should think it's a scam. Because it makes no sense, magic internet money, right? And it just doesn't. So first thing would be, okay, you should not just go buy Bitcoin. Because if you just go buy Bitcoin and you don't understand it, you're not going to be able to handle the volatility. And I've seen this time and time again in the broader crypto markets, actually, because the average person that doesn't understand Bitcoin is probably more likely to buy something other than Bitcoin because it's quote unquote cheaper. And then they don't understand it, and then they can't handle the volatility, and then they end up losing money, and they sell it, and just bad experience. So just again, actually, as a Bitcoiner, thinking over longer term, educate yourself, develop your own understanding of the asset, and work with people in the community as well. And then once you have that conviction, then you'll be able to harness the volatility to your advantage to actually generate long run wealth. So it all comes back to education for the haters. And if you can't educate yourself, then you're probably going to end up poor. So the have fun staying poor meme probably ends up applying, but yeah.
It's funny, right? Because I think that meme is actually meant as an encouragement, right? It's meant as a trigger to kind of say hey, I was where you were, right? Because 99.9% of people do not get any education on money. I mean, even, you had a financial background. I talked to many people with an economical background, CPAs, CFAs, etc., and they were all I studied something, but I never learned what money is, right? So it's not bad if you have no clue what type of monetary system you're participating in, right? But the whole adversity towards, I think, many Bitcoiners actually would love to help other people, but you have to show that you want to be helped in a sense. And I think the have fun staying poor is more have fun staying poor. I mean, I'm happy I figured this out, or else, I would have stayed poor as well. But I think many people see that as kind of toxic maximalism, but I actually think it's kind of meant as a trigger. Okay, well, what do you mean have fun staying poor? I'm not going to have fun staying poor. Why are you saying that? So happy you threw that in there. So yeah, how I think this year is an interesting year. There's a lot happening. how much further do you think we'll see Bitcoin mature this year? Like in this is like the primary year of the cycle, as many think. How do you see it evolve? And maybe, do you also have a price target? Like, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. So I'm in the camp of this is maturing into more of a super cycle than the cycles of times past. And what that means to me is that I'm very constructive on the price of Bitcoin. But I think within a super cycle, it could go to the moon, or it could just stabilize in this 100 to 200K range over the course of the year with massive potential upside. I think either of those scenarios is possible. And my view on price predictions is I always think in terms of probabilities. And so to me, I'm never in the mindset of like, I think Bitcoin will be at 250K. I think of different price targets and different possibilities. I think the odds of Bitcoin closing the year below 70K are almost zero. Okay, so with that as a backdrop, you look at Bitcoin at 90K and you say, okay, 20K is basically my worst downside scenario that I think is possible, and infinity is basically the upside. That's an asset that I want to own. Mm-hmm. And I say infinity because I hope the answer isn't infinity, actually, because that would mean stuff breaks in major ways, and probably not in a world that would be ideal. It would be much better for Bitcoin over the next few years to go to 1 million than infinity, and I think that's more likely. But I do think that there are scenarios where really, really high targets are possible, but maybe not the best scenarios that even as Bitcoiners we should hope for.
Yeah, and so with all these things going on, you mentioned like a possible super cycle, like everything going on from the nation state adoption talk to ETFs to more companies adopting, etc. Do you think we are past this point of diminishing returns? I think that's always a nice hot topic in Bitcoin, right? And diminishing returns, that people say, well, the gains will become lower and lower over time, whereas other people say, no, we are following kind of like this technology adoption S curve, where we are actually getting to a point where the suddenly phase moves in, and we actually go exponential for some time until that stabilizes again. What are your thoughts around that?
I think there's going to be a period of time, and I can't give you a date. I wish I was that smart to give you a date, where it's going to go completely exponentially up. And that will likely coincide with something like a developed nation announcing or acquiring a million Bitcoin or something like that. And so I'm not of the mindset that it has to be like a logarithmic return where you start out a very high percentage and over future it goes down. I think it could go up very forcefully at some point, and likely will, just when you think through some of the game theory dynamics of what's at play here. I think that's more likely. I would heavily weight it towards the at some point it goes exponential, but that the days of I'm not concerned about an 80% drop in the price of Bitcoin right now, I guess is short version.
Yeah, me neither. I think maybe we just had like a 20-ish%. I still feel that after 10 years, I have to say, but I know long run we're good. But I also think like the 80% that I've experienced like 3 times now. I do. I hope, but I also do think that's over. But on the other side, I do think like, why would that also happen, right? Because if more and more people understand the problem, that is the reason of existence for Bitcoin, right? And they study Bitcoin, and I think we've both experienced that. Yeah, once you see it, you cannot unsee it, right? So this is the only thing that, you will focus on. This will become your hurdle rate. Like, why would you sell it? Like, sell for what is kind of like my meme, right? Like, I think that's going to grow over time. So I agree. There's going to be less of these drawdowns. But like, what let's say the next 10 years, we talked a lot about the next 10 years. What are the biggest challenges you see on the horizon?
For Bitcoin?
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenges aren't really a risk to Bitcoin, but I think it's more of a risk of who are the winners in this Bitcoin boom. And I think that's not decided. And I think it will be decided by when you can convince the right group of people, whether it's at a corporation, whether it's at a nation, whether it's at a state, to really adopt Bitcoin as Bitcoin standard and Bitcoin as the hurdle rate. That's just not easy. It's not easy.
No.
I don't think it's preordained that America has to be the leader in this. I don't think it's preordained which corporations will be the leader in this. That's all going to be through hard work, hard conversations, education. And so that to me is, I'm actually not concerned about Bitcoin going up. I am concerned about who the ultimate winners are in Bitcoin as it develops into a globally accepted, hard asset that is deemed less speculative.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a hard game. Like really, if you stay behind, I think it's similar to AI actually. Like if you ignore that, it's similar to printing press, gunpowder. It's at that level, I think. And I agree with you. Like that, just really staying behind like that would be a very bad decision for a country, because especially with Bitcoin, it's going to be really hard to catch up. Like you could make the gunpowder, you could get more printing presses, etc. But with a finite supply as what Bitcoin has, that's going to be really difficult. And probably countries that do adopt Bitcoin will also attract people from the countries that don't. So, yeah, that's an interesting thought to ponder on.
And that kind of gets at the point of, oftentimes you hear the critics of, name your place, whether it's a company or the United States government, or say, you have a bunch of Bitcoiners that are going to come here and they're going to talk their own book because they'll enrich themselves if the United States buys Bitcoin. And I think for most people that are there, it's not the case at all. They're just legitimately worried about their country's strength into the future and they bought it. And so sometimes, if you look at, someone that might be conflicted to give an opinion, that confliction actually is conviction, and they put their money where their mouth is in a personal basis. And they're actually like, I don't think that anybody buys Bitcoin. They don't believe in it at all, but they just want to buy it to then go convince the US government to buy it. Yes. No, they're legitimately believe this, and they're here because they care and they believe what they're telling you. And so I think that's true sometimes a lot beyond just Bitcoin and in other areas where people, they say you're talking your book. I'd rather have someone talk their book to me because they're all in than have no connection to the thing that they're trying to sell me.
But I think we have some way to go. But I love what you are doing on it, and I love this conversation. So thanks for sharing your thoughts. I wanted to wrap up with my last question, and I ask everyone the same question, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go?
Core belief that I'll never let go is that it actually ties back to my faith, and that we're here for a bigger purpose on life, and that for me that faith is in my faith in Jesus. So I'll never let that go. That's always at the core of everything I do. I actually think it even ties to why Bitcoin and better forms of money and earning honest wages. But that is something I'll never let go.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for sharing. Thanks again for this conversation. And let's do it again sometime. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.